Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel, and we're now in to the period that covers really the resurrection of Christmas in 1660, and we're going to go up to the closing stages of the Great War, which obviously happened in 1918. So we're on to our second video. If you're interested, go back and have a look through the playlist and you will see we've now got a playlist on Christmas, and within there we've got our first video about pre-Christian times. We've then got Christian times, and in particular the medieval and Tudor Christmas. But like I said in the last video, the Puritans have banned Christmas. Not Oliver Cromwell, but the Puritans in general has actually put a ban in. Saying that, some people did carry on with Christmas. We know lots and lots of people were arrested and also fined, and some imprisoned for having Christmas celebrations. But generally speaking, it was no more. We know in 1660, when we get the restoration of the monarchy, King Charles II, he was the one that opened all the theatres again because the Puritans had banned those. He also started famously the May Day celebrations again, the dancing around a maypole, for example. And obviously, he also resurrected or restored Christmas. The only problem is, in the latter period of the 17th century, so the 1670s, 1680s and so on, Christmas was never the same really. The Puritans had banned it, even though it was banned for a short period of time. It had done the damage, and very simply a lot of people just didn't bother with Christmas. Why bother with it, even though we can do it now? It's been banned. I've got used to not having Christmas is pretty much what everyone said. So when we get to the 1700s, and in particular the reign of King George I and King George II, there was some people celebrating Christmas, but it was never a big thing. That ban had done the damage. And like I said, even if you have a look at Jane Austen works and so on, you will hear about Christmas in the Georgian period, the Regency period, but it's not big. It's not as big as it used to be. Now, when we get to the reign of Queen Victoria, however, this young queen, this young monarch, she is really the one that pushes for Christmas like the medieval period. She pushes the popularity of Christmas again. So what did the Victorians do in particular? Well, to start with, they wanted to decorate their homes, and they chose, for example, the old decorations of holly, ivy and mistletoe. But by the Victorian period, they were also adding to the decorations. For example, a lot of people used to cut up strips of paper, coloured paper, plain paper, old packaging. They used to use a flour and water based glue, and they create rings, and then those rings became large lengths of paper chains, for example. There was also the folding of paper, cutting with scissors, not all the way through, but only halfway through, and then once again taking the flour and water glue and creating what we would all recognise today as the famous paper lantern. So they've got the old pagan decorations, the same decorations as our medieval ancestors, but they're now adding to it. And the reason for that really is down to the fact that the Victorians were great crafters, for example. They really did like things like paper and cutting out, and therefore they're adding to the decorations. Now, another interesting thing is this table decoration, and what it's actually made of is a log with a candle in the middle, and that is very much what our pagan ancestors would do with the Yule log. It's basically a Yule log. Now, because the fireplaces have got smaller, because we don't have the open hearth anymore, because we're using coal or coke, for example, then people are starting to use this as a table decoration. So it's a hang-up from the festival of Yule, basically, the candle representing the light. So in a way, it's very much a Viking idea, but it's now on the table as a form of table decoration. But one of the biggest things that the Victorians are known for when it comes to decorating their homes is the Christmas tree. Now, you're probably thinking, haha, that's Prince Albert. Prince Albert brought the Christmas tree to Britain and everyone copied it. Well, the interesting thing is, the Christmas tree was not that common in the Victorian era, really. Poor people, for example, didn't bother with that. They just preferred to put up the holly, ivy and mistletoe if they could get hold of it or if they could afford it. But really, the Christmas tree came to Britain with Queen Charlotte. So actually, before the Victorian period. However, the Punch magazine had a picture in it of the young Queen, along with Prince Albert, and a Christmas tree. And famously, that really did fire the Christmas tree in the Victorian age. So please never say the Christmas tree was brought here by the Victorians. Definitely not by Prince Albert. The Christmas tree came here before them in the reign of Queen Charlotte. But interestingly, they're the ones that make it popular because the Punch magazine has this picture in it. And what you will notice about the Christmas tree is the only decoration a lot of the early trees had on them were these, which are little tin clips that held a candle. And these would be lit, but usually when the gifts were open that was under the tree, or maybe just when they were singing carols, for example, they weren't lit all the time, which means that the trees are relatively safe, really. They're only having them lit when people are around. And this is what later gives us the fairy light on a tree. No one fully knows why the candles are on the tree. Some people just say for pure decoration. There is also a theory that because Germans used to like hiking, and like hiking on a winter's night, for example, they used to walk through the Black Forest and they could see the stars twinkling between the trees. And very simply, some people think that that's where the candle comes from. It's representing the twinkling of the stars in the night sky amongst a tree canopy. This could be the theory. We will never fully know. But then eventually the Victorians added things to their Christmas tree. It was quite common to have little cones of sweets on the tree, or maybe even little gingerbread men hanging off the tree, and these could be given as gifts when people come round to your house. But eventually the glass bauble appears, and the glass bauble gets hung on the tree and it becomes a very, very popular decoration. The only problem is if they drop off the tree or you knock the tree, they will shatter into 1,000 pieces, as after all they were made out of glass. But for a Victorian, church was very important. You would attend a church service at Christmas. It was also said that you should walk to church. You should never ever ride in a carriage, for example. And that's really down to the fact that people still believed in this old idea, the old idea of going on a pilgrimage, for example, walking on foot into the church. So it was quite a common thing. And a lot of Victorians also liked the tradition of a visit from St. Nicholas, and famously there is even a poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, and everyone knows how it starts. It's the start with the following lines of, "It was the night before Christmas, and all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse." And in there they actually describe how St. Nicholas would visit, and no one really knows where the hanging of the stocking comes from. No one really knows. One theory is that one day someone hung some stockings or socks by a fire to dry out, and when St. Nicholas rode across the rooftops on a horse, throwing coins as he went, coins tinkled down the chimney, and because the stocking was there drying, it was filled with coin, and therefore the tradition was, let's hang a stocking up at Christmas time to hopefully catch the coins that St. Nicholas is throwing. Eventually St. Nicholas becomes Father Christmas, really. That's a nice early picture of St. Nicholas, and he's wearing his bishop's clothes basically. And we've also got down here Black Peter. And the interesting thing is, one idea is that St. Nicholas would throw the coins and the gifts down the chimneys that would miraculously end up in a stocking. And Black Peter technically is the only one that enters the home. And he would enter a house to literally beat the naughty children. What a great story that is. And he would also fill their stockings with coal soot or dirt, basically rubbish, useless stuff. Anyway, if you had a stocking up and your parents or Father Christmas had stuffed them with goodies, to a Victorian it would usually consist of a piece of fruit. The ultimate would be the orange, obviously an exotic fruit from across the empire, nuts as well, and that's really to represent food for the new year. You're going to get nourishment, for example. They're very symbolic. Victorians were very much into symbolism. You could end up with a lump of coal, and this would give you warmth into the new year. And some people think this is a Scottish tradition. Well, it's not. The Scottish tradition is first footing, which is New Year, but a lump of coal would give you warmth into the new year. And it was very common to have one shiny penny in that stocking, guaranteeing that you've got money into the new year as well. But the Victorians would go to church, they would open one or two presents, if that. You didn't get a whole host of presents years ago. And then you would have Christmas dinner, and it was the Victorians that pretty much gave us the Christmas dinner that we have. The roast potatoes, the Brussels sprouts, the cabbage, the parsnips, the carrots. But the meat of the time was usually goose. Turkey doesn't really become popular until 1970s, 1980s, so it was goose normally. And then once they'd stuffed themselves with their Christmas feast, very much like all the other ancestors, including our medieval ancestors, it was normal to have parlour games, and the Victorians had hundreds of them. There are lots of parlour games, including the ones in this little keepsake here. There's one where you take your right hand and you grab hold of your left ear, and then you take your left hand and grab hold of your right toe, and then you have a footstool with a handkerchief on, and you have to bend down and pick up the handkerchief with your mouth, which is absolutely dangerous parlour game. One of my other favourites is a very, very shallow bowl or plate. You throw currants and raisins in it, you pour some alcohol in it, you set fire to it, you invite all the children around, and they have to grab the currants and raisins from the burning alcohol. Mad game, dangerous game, and that's Snapdragon. So the Victorians had a lot of fun at Christmas time. They had the feasting, they also had the fun in games, and obviously the decorations. So you can see how it's slowly becoming the Christmas that we would recognise. But remember, the Christmas tree is not Victorian. It is before the Victorians. It's Queen Charlotte, in fact. But the Victorians also have a lot of firsts. They invent a lot of new things. Tom Smith comes along and creates famously the Christmas cracker. You also have Henry Cole that created the first Christmas card. And then you also get the resurrection of the Mummers play, which basically is the pantomime. So it's quite interesting how you get all these things thrown together. And as I always say, the important thing about Christmas is we cherry pick. We like some of the things, and some of the things that we don't like, we actually forget about. But the Victorian era is really when our Christmas that we would recognise today is created. But then, unfortunately, by the 1900s, there is a major power struggle going on in Europe, and we get the Great War, the First World War. It started in the summer, 4th of August 1914. By Christmas 1914, everyone was saying the war would be over by that Christmas, but unfortunately it went on into 1915, 1916, 1917, and then finally coming to an end technically on the 11th of November 1918. And during that period of time, people did think Christmas would never survive. It survived a ban, but it would never survive a massive war. But it did. Famously, in 1914, there was the unofficial truce, but what you must remember about this is it wasn't a whole truce along along the whole of the front line. It only happened sporadically in a few areas, and in particular the football match is only happening in one particular area. So it's not this great time of coming together, kicking a football around with the Germans. That did not happen along the whole line, but that was 1914. Princess Mary created a Princess Mary Fund, and this guaranteed every soldier would get a gift. It came in a little tin. It had, for example, a picture of Princess Mary, a pencil in the shape of a bullet, a tiny little Christmas card, and then you had a selection of inserts. Sometimes they were cigarettes and tobacco, other times they were, for example, sweets and chocolate. But like I said, people carried on with Christmas. In a way, some people said Christmas was actually more homely during the war, because you really stopped and thought about what Christmas actually meant, the birth of Christ, for example. There were other funds. There was a Christmas pudding fund. There we go, a plum pudding fund, and these were sent to all the troops. And along with that, people were encouraged to send comforts for the troops, things like the balaclava helmet, things like the what we would now call the tank top, for example, these sleeveless jumpers. And soldiers would also send gifts home. It was usually, for example, a pressed flower, or if they could get hold of the Christmas cards that was created by French and Belgian people, they would send those home. And this is an example of one of them, and these are silk and they're hand embroidered, absolutely fantastic things. But luckily, like any war, the war did come to an end, and famously in 1918 the war did come to an end, and Christmas survived it. So it survived the ban, and it survived the Great War, the war that would end all wars. And that's where we want to stop this evening's talk, really, up to the start and finish of the Great War. Now, in tomorrow's video, which is going to be our last daily video, we're going to take a look at the post-war Britain. So what was Christmases like in the 1930s? But unfortunately, without spoiling the story, we're thrown into another war. And after that war in 1945, we're into post-war Britain, a very bleak period in our history. And just like anything that we do in Discover History, we're going to end with really the 1950s and the early 1960s, because technically we cover any age from the Stone Age up to the 1950s, partly into the 1960s as well. So hopefully you're following these. Make sure you subscribe, and even though tomorrow is our last daily video, our lockdown video, we will produce videos over the Christmas period, so keep a lookout for them. But like I said, they won't be daily. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon. Bye bye.